The latest season of Doctor Who finished airing at the end of May 2025. While it started off amazingly strong and has some episodes that rank among my favourites, the finale sputtered into one of the most disappointing endings I've ever seen from a Doctor Who season. But was this just about bad writing decisions, or did something behind the scenes screw things up beyond the writer's control? The truth is, it's a bit of both. My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress who loves overanalyzing Doctor Who. And today, I'm taking a deep dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the latest season of the world's longest-running science fiction show. In my review of last year's season of Doctor Who, the show's 14th since it came off hiatus in 2005, I felt positive about it overall despite some criticisms. Some platforms refer to that 14th series as Season 1 and the most recent series as Season 2, but I'm going to be calling them Series 14 and 15 to avoid confusion here. For Series 15, I felt like the show had higher highs than Series 14, but the lows were really disappointing. Not just disappointing in a cringy or goofy kind of way, but disappointing in a this could have been so good kind of way. In this video, I won't just be talking about the content of Series 15 itself, I'll also be discussing some of the behind-the-scenes production issues and speculating about where the show might go from here. Of course, my opinions are not the be-all end-all of Doctor Who hot takes, so whether you agree with my thoughts on this series or not, leave a comment, let's discuss. To paraphrase the 11th Doctor, this video is gonna be a whopper, so I've divided it up into chapters by topic. You can find a list of the chapters in the description. Feel free to skip to the topic you're most interested in or watch this video all the way through for the full story. If you like videos about books, science fiction, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to get access to all of my YouTube videos before anyone else, as well as keeping up with all of my other projects and content, be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, which you can find linked in the description. Now let's dive in. Before I get into my detailed thoughts about Series 15, I'll give a high-level summary of my opinions without spoiling any specific plot points. Ncuti Gatwa continued to shine as the Doctor, and while I loved him last season, he seemed to get even more comfortable in the role this season. He was joined in the TARDIS by the amazing Varada Sethu as new companion Belinda Chandra. Belinda takes her first trip off Earth against her will, and the Doctor's main mission in this series is to get her home to her family. However, they keep bouncing off the date she wants to be home for, May the 24th, 2025. To try and force the TARDIS to arrive on the correct date, the Doctor must visit a variety of times and places to charge up a device called the Vindicator that might propel the TARDIS to their destination. But more trouble awaits on May the 24th, 2025 than they bargained for. Unlike Series 14, where the episodes felt disjointed from each other to the point where I feel like they should have aired in a different order, the episodes in Series 15 build off each other quite well. In the beginning, I was convinced that this season could become one of my all-time favorites. I genuinely think the first 5 episodes are fantastic, and the 6th was also pretty good, with a big caveat that I'll discuss in the section about the Doctor's dark side. However, even though I liked the majority of the episodes this season, they suffered from a problem that I complained about in Series 14 as well. They often felt like they could use an extra 10 minutes of runtime to let the story breathe. Series 14 and 15 only consist of 8 45-minute episodes each, 9 episodes if you count the Christmas specials. But the revival show used to have 13 45-minute episodes per season. This reduced episode count is likely intended to align with typical episode counts in the age of streaming, and to save money in an era where it's much more expensive to make TV than it was in 2005. However, that means the 2-part episodes that used to let the meteor stories breathe in seasons past are basically non-existent in the current era of the show. Some of the episodes in Series 15 handle the fast pace better than others. Episode 3, The Well, is a claustrophobic thriller-style episode that works nicely with a brisk pace. The series opener, The Robot Revolution, is from Belinda's perspective, and the fast pace felt like it mirrored her confusion and terror at being kidnapped by robots and flung into this adventure against her will. On the other hand, the 5th episode of this season, The Story and the Engine, felt like it needed some extra time to let its imaginative and ambitious concepts breathe a little more and allow more explanation of the world's mechanics. Like Series 14, Series 15 leans more into fantasy elements than the show has in the past. Doctor Who has always been kind of a fantasy show disguised as science fiction, but the last couple of seasons have introduced characters that are explicitly fantastical gods with otherworldly powers. In the second 60th anniversary special, Wild Blue Yonder, the 14th Doctor invokes a superstition at the end of the universe that is implied to unleash a pantheon of gods into our universe. Some of them are existing Doctor Who villains who have been restyled as pantheon members, such as the Toymaker from the third 60th anniversary special, The Giggle, and some are completely new, such as Maestro from the series 14 episode The Devil's Cord. This has in some cases come along with more meta elements, with The Devil's Cord featuring numerous fourth wall breaks that I didn't feel were incorporated into the story very well. Series 15 also contains some meta elements in the episode Lux, but I felt like they gelled with the story a lot better. The fantastical bent also allowed the story in the engine to explore some mythology and folklore in a way that the show hasn't really done before. But I do sometimes find that the fantasy elements in Doctor Who can function as an excuse not to explain things properly. It's true that you don't necessarily have to explain how fantastical and magical elements work in the same way that you have to explain how a science fiction concept works. But even fantasy stories require internal logic and consistency. In general, I found that the episodes that leaned more into science fiction, such as The Well and Interstellar Song Contest, were easier for me to follow from a mechanics perspective than episodes that relied more on fantasy, such as The Story and the Engine and The Reality War. One of the things I really like about The Story and the Engine, though, is the strength of how it uses its characters. Just like in many folk tales, the actual mechanics of the fantasy elements take a backseat to the exploration of what the characters tell us about the human condition. Unfortunately, I found that the character writing in several other episodes wasn't as strong as I hoped. I have a whole rant later in this video about how disappointing Belinda's character ended up being, and pretty much every returning character in the finale felt so flat that showrunner Russell T Davies might as well have waved around some cardboard cutouts and called it a day. The series finale, The Reality War, broke my heart, and not in a good way. Doctor Who is no stranger to messy finales, but this one felt especially messy and cobbled together, which makes sense with the context that it was the product of extensive reshoots. I'll discuss the evidence that the finale underwent a lot of reshoots and the reasons for them in the section about this season's production issues. But for now, suffice to say, I really didn't like it. I'll admit to liking last season's finale, Empire of Death, more than most people, even though I do recognize its flaws. I've even cooled on Empire of Death a bit more than when I filmed my video about Series 14 last year, because yeah, the explanation for the strange happenings around Ruby Sunday were really stupid. But I feel more vindicated in liking Empire of Death now, because the fact is, when Empire of Death ended, I felt happy and emotional and triumphant. After the Reality War, I just kind of felt dead inside. We can quibble about plot and story logic all we like, but at the end of the day, I like Doctor Who for how it makes me feel. Was the Reality War the worst episode of Doctor Who ever? I think no, largely because Gatwa gave one of his best performances of the entire season, and because it's very difficult to top my loathing for the Series 11 finale, The Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, which I've been thinking about making a video about because I hate it so much. Drop a comment if you want to see an entire video of me dunking on the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. But the bar I want the show to be clearing is not, is it better than the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos? Overall, the recent era of Doctor Who shines most with episodes that more or less do their own thing, focusing on telling a single story with a novel concept and doing something really inventive with it. There are numerous such episodes of the 15th Doctor's run that I'll happily come back to enjoy again and again. It's just a shame that a relatively promising run of episodes had to be capped off by such a steaming pile of messy lore dumps and unsatisfying story arcs. I think I've said all I can without spoiling stuff, so let's jump into the first of this video's spoilery sections, starting with our main character himself, the 15th Doctor. Let's have a quick recap of where we left the Doctor last season. 15 was introduced to us as the Doctor if he went to therapy. He's a much more energetic incarnation than the 14th Doctor, whom he bigenerated from rather than regenerating normally. 15 is certainly more open with his emotions than many of his predecessors were, seeming more willing to express both love and sadness. But he still bottles up his emotions, specifically when he has to separate from someone he cares about, such as when his romantic interest Rogue gets trapped in a pocket dimension, or his companion Ruby Sunday leaves the TARDIS to spend more time with her family. So I do feel like 15 needs additional therapy more than he lets on. 15 does, however, credit Ruby with making him more comfortable speaking about family and his own origins. Like most incarnations of the Doctor, 15 hugely values compassion, even though he also has some dark and vengeful moments that show he's not as much of a hero as he thinks he is. So how does this carry into Series 15? The Doctor maintains his energy and enthusiasm into this season as well, quickly winning Belinda's trust despite her initial skepticism about him. In the series 14 episode Dot and Bubble, we saw the Doctor face racism, and this isn't entirely absent in series 15, with references to segregation when the Doctor visits 1952 Miami in the episode Lux. But series 15 also shows how the Doctor now finds community and celebration in different places than when he was white. The episode The Story and the Engine takes place in a barbershop in Nigeria, where the Doctor often drops in to laugh and tell stories with the people there. We can see the joy and comfort that the Doctor gets from being in this space, connecting with humanity in a whole different way than he did before, and it makes him all the more eager to fight for the barbershop when it gets taken over by the mysterious barber. When the shop's previous owner, Omo, tries to offer up the Doctor as a captive to the barber in exchange for letting himself and the other customers go, the Doctor reacts badly. This isn't because the Doctor doesn't think he can take the barber on his own, but rather because he thought Omo would always have his back no matter what, and it hurts him deeply that the person who has accepted him up until now would betray him like that. Luckily, Omo apologizes in the end, saying that he should have protected the Doctor because he is part of his community. When Omo says, "I thought you could handle anything," the Doctor responds, "I can, because you look after me too." I really loved seeing this vulnerability from the Doctor. He is incredibly resilient, but he needs human connection and the strength of community to sustain him. Side note that another reason I like The Story and the Engine is because it gave me another 10 seconds of the Fugitive Doctor, and I would murder and pillage for a Fugitive Doctor spin-off. I love her so much. We see echoes of the Doctor's desire for community in the way that the theme of family is continued from the previous season. In series 14, the Doctor's granddaughter Susan, who travelled with him in the classic series, was mentioned several times. In series 15, Susan's original actress Carol Ann Ford actually shows up in flashes in the Doctor's mind, pushing him to be a better person and trying to get him to snap out of a fake reality in the episode Wish World. I really thought that these flashes were a precursor to Susan showing up in the flesh, but that never happened. That may have something to do with the season's production issues that I will discuss later. In the episode Wish World, 15 is given a family, with Belinda being styled as his wife and the two of them having a daughter, Poppy, but they're living inside a fake dystopian reality dreamed up by the character Conrad. The Doctor thinks he's a human with the name John Smith, and Poppy isn't even a real child. A character called Poppy, played by the same actor, appeared in last season in the episode Space Babies, but this Poppy is presumably pulled from the Doctor's memory rather than being the same person. The Doctor longs for a family, and Wishworld gives him one. However, a family means so many more things than a heterosexual nuclear family, and given that 15 is primarily attracted to men, this isn't the kind of family he wants for himself. It's worth noting that the Doctor's sexuality is fluid between incarnations, and indeed the 10th Doctor was tempted by the promise of a heterosexual nuclear family in the Series 3 episode Family of Blood. But 15 would prefer to have a man as a romantic partner, and while he shows a willingness to be a family with Belinda and Poppy even after he realizes Wishworld is fake, he wants a sort of platonic co-parenting situation. The exploration of the Doctor being a parent dovetails with the revelation that Time Lords are sterile now. This information is relayed in the Reality War by the Rani, a villainous Time Lord who last appeared in the classic series. When the Master destroyed Gallifrey in Series 12, he sent a shockwave throughout time and space that killed all the Time Lords who were off-world as well. In The Devil's Cord, the Doctor describes it as a great big cellular explosion. The Rani managed to flip her DNA briefly to avoid being killed, but she still ended up sterilized. It's not really explained how come the Doctor wasn't killed, but it's possible that the Master purposely spared the Doctor to gloat about the carnage he'd caused. Another possibility is that the Doctor was only partly affected by the genetic explosion because the Doctor isn't strictly a Time Lord. As a brief recap, after he destroyed Gallifrey, the Master explained to the 13th Doctor that she wasn't born on Gallifrey like she'd thought. Instead, she fell through a portal from another universe as a child, where a Gallifreyan explorer named Tecteun found her. When Tecteun realized the child had the ability to regenerate, she experimented on the child and then spliced the ability to regenerate into high-class Gallifreyans to create the first Time Lords. The child had their memory wiped, but they grew up to become the Doctor. It's not clear at the moment whether the Doctor is biologically much different to every other Time Lord now, because Time Lords were basically made from the Doctor. To the extent that the show has continued engaging with the timeless child stuff since former showrunner Russell T Davies returned to spearhead the show after Series 13, it's been more about how it emotionally affects the Doctor rather than getting too bogged down in lore. Personally, I like this approach because it honors the contributions of previous showrunner Chris Chibnall without overcomplicating the lore any more than it has to be. The Time Lords off-world either dying or becoming sterile from the Master's destruction of Gallifrey is probably the most lore-heavy brick that the show has laid atop the Chibnall era since Chibnall left. I don't mind the addition of Time Lord sterility to the lore itself, but I felt the explanation of it was rushed and messy, as evidenced by the fact that I had to go and Google the script for the Series 12 finale to check what exactly the Master did to Gallifrey. I've seen a lot of people online who got confused into thinking the Time Lords were sterile all along, or that they'd been sterile since the Time War that happened during the hiatus between the 1996 TV movie and the first revival series. Honestly, when the Rani first started talking about how Time Lords can't reproduce anymore, I thought they were about to make looms canon. Looms are a concept that appears in some Doctor Who expanded media, and are basically devices that grow new Time Lords because the Time Lords can't reproduce sexually. But they've been pretty much ignored in the main show, and if anything, up until this point, the show has implied that Time Lords aren't sterile. One neat thing to come out of the lore change is an explanation for why the Doctor bigenerated in the episode The Giggle, and why we see the Rani bigenerate in the episode Interstellar Song Contest. Because they are now sterile, their bodies were making a last-ditch attempt at reproduction, even though it's not really reproduction because bigeneration just makes the same Time Lord twice at different points in their time stream. I quite like this as an explanation for bigeneration. It feels neat and self-contained. But an important part of this season's message is that the Doctor doesn't have to physically reproduce to have a family. In the finale, there's a scene in Unit headquarters where several characters are talking about how the Doctor has saved them, and the head of Unit, Kate Stewart, says, "Sometimes I think we're all your children," which I think is a weird way to phrase it, but the point is that the Doctor's friends are his found family. So I've been avoiding the elephant in the room thus far, because this season was the end of the line for the 15th Doctor. In the series finale, after the Doctor and his friends defeat the villains and get rid of the fake Wish World reality, the Doctor and Belinda's daughter Poppy is erased from existence. But the Doctor is desperate to get her back, and he can do it by shifting reality one tiny degree. Unfortunately, that means pouring an entire regeneration's worth of energy into the time vortex. I'll have a whole section about my thoughts on the regeneration itself later in this video. But as far as the Doctor's motivations for causing his regeneration, I think they were fantastically believable. I will say that I personally didn't care enough about Poppy to feel the regeneration was justified. She's a super cute kid, but I wasn't desperate enough to yoink her into reality that I was willing to let 15 go over it. But I absolutely believed that the Doctor was desperate to save Poppy. Quite aside from the fact that the Doctor just likes to protect the vulnerable, and aside from the fact that Poppy was his daughter in a fake reality, the Doctor likely relates to Poppy because he was the timeless child. He knows what it's like to be a lost child with no parents, alone in the wrong universe. In the Series 14 episode Space Babies, the Doctor even bonded with the real Captain Poppy because of his experience as the timeless child, empathizing with her feeling of loneliness over not having parents and her worries that she might be, quote, wrong. Given that the Doctor's daughter Poppy was originally pulled from his memories, her existence in Wish World might very well be down to the fact that the Doctor desperately wanted the original Poppy to be loved and cared for. And thanks to his sacrifice, by the end of the episode, Poppy does exist to be loved and cared for, albeit not as his own daughter, but as the daughter of Belinda and one of her ex-boyfriends. There were a lot of things I didn't like about this season's ending, and I'll get more into them in my section about Belinda and my section about the regeneration itself. But one scene I loved is when Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor appears shortly before 15 goes through with his plan to save Poppy. Because 15 is about to punch a massive hole into the time vortex, 13 briefly gets popped into the current version of the TARDIS, and they have a lovely little chat. I have to admit that the 13th Doctor's era of the show wasn't my favourite, but this little cameo reminded me just how much I love the concept of 13 as a character. She's fun, she's quirky, she's a little sarcastic at times, and it's all a facade for how emotionally unavailable she is. When 15 tells her he loves her, 13 remarks on how she never says that to people, and 15 says, "That's why you got me." I also loved how 13 goes, "I should say that to Yaz," and the 15th Doctor says, "You never do, but she knows." It's just like the 10th Doctor saying, "Oh, she knows," about Rose in the episode The Satan Pit. I could rant about Thasmin forever, so drop a comment if you want a video essay about how the 13th Doctor and Yaz could have been an amazing Doctor-companion romance, but they didn't get the development they deserved. Suffice to say, 13's appearance shows that, while 15 is in many ways a work in progress himself, he's come a long way in terms of being open about his feelings since his 13th incarnation. And while the Doctor normally regenerates to save themselves from injury or sickness, 15 regenerates as a willing sacrifice in the biggest expression of love he can possibly give to the daughter he never had and the child he once was. This section of the video largely focused on the parts of the 15th Doctor's character arc that I felt harmonized well together. This is how I hope to remember 15, an incarnation who loves deeply, who isn't defined by his past, and who has found a bigger family than he ever hoped to have after Gallifrey's destruction. But now I want to talk about an aspect of the Doctor's character that I felt wasn't handled as well this season. And that's a real shame because it's usually one of my favorite things about the Doctor. One of the things I liked about last season was the glimpses into the Doctor's dark side, but the handling of the Doctor's grey morality in this season felt more ham-fisted and sometimes accidental than it did last season. For one thing, it gave me whiplash when the Doctor seemed to celebrate the villain of the robot revolution, Alan, getting aged backwards into a sperm and an egg and being hoovered up by a polishing robot. Sure, Alan didn't die per se, but now he's never lived at all, and that doesn't quite seem like something to celebrate even if he was an awful person. The Doctor even recognizes that Alan is secretly hurting deep inside, indicating that there might have been some form of redemption possible for him. I'd have much preferred it if Alan regressed into a baby instead so they could take him back to his parents to raise him right. Kind of like how Margaret Slitheen got turned into an egg at the end of the episode Boomtown, and the Doctor took her to Raxacoricophalopatorius to grow up again and have a second chance at being good. Alan's fate is a kind of blink and you'll miss it moment, but it still felt off. Doctor Who has a long-running theme of redemption and renewal, with many of its villains being at least given a chance to do better. If the Doctor acts out of character by taking delight in harming a villain, it needs to be recognized by the show and ideally incorporated into the Doctor's character arc. Which brings me to 15's most jarring out-of-character moment for me, a scene in episode 6, the Interstellar Song Contest. I'll admit to being quite positive about this episode when it first came out, but the more I sat with it, the more the execution didn't sit right with me. This episode, which was meant as a tie-in to the real-life Eurovision Song Contest, features a plot to hijack the contest and kill not only the 100,000 live show audience members, but the 3 trillion broadcast viewers as well. The orchestrator of this plot is Kid, whose planet Helia was destroyed for profit by the contest sponsor Poppy Honey. Not only were most of the Hellions killed, but the remaining Hellions are discriminated against and blamed for their own planet's destruction. Kid wants to turn the contest into a massacre to get revenge against Poppy Honey and the contest itself, including everybody watching. Obviously, the Doctor wants to stop Kid from killing 3 trillion people, but after the Doctor has already foiled Kid's plan, he goes out of his way to electrocute Kid just to cause him pain. The Doctor also tells Kid how despicable he is, saying, "I have met so many versions of you, Kid, and revenge is just an excuse, because your cold, filthy heart just likes to kill." Villains like the Master have successfully committed genocide right in front of the Doctor, but the Doctor has never tortured the Master for funsies or told them how irredeemably horrible they are. Just in the previous episode, The Story and the Engine, the Doctor empathized with and gave a second chance to the Barber, who wanted to destroy the essence of humanity by taking away all stories because he felt his ambition had been slighted. Surely, if the Doctor can show that compassion to someone driven to do bad things by ego, he can at least not needlessly torture someone who was driven to do bad things by grief. At this point in the story, the Doctor doesn't know the context about the destruction of Helia that other characters have narrated to Belinda, and none of this is to say that Kid should get a free pass to kill 3 trillion people. But the Doctor's assessment of Kid's motivations just isn't true. Rather than being purely callous, we're shown that Kid's actions are driven by immense grief and pain and anger that the corporation who destroyed his planet will never suffer as he has suffered unless he does something drastic. Even though Kid's methods are awful, this impulse is something the Doctor himself should be able to understand, given that he is also a genocide survivor who has been tempted to commit atrocities out of grief and anger. Ah, but wait, the episode treats the Doctor torturing Kid as a bad thing. Belinda tells the Doctor that he scared her, and the Doctor has to explain that he reacted so strongly to Kid because the threat of 3 trillion deaths reminded him of Gallifrey's destruction. But while the episode is a bit self-aware, I didn't feel like the Doctor really sat with the weight of what he'd done. The episode that unfortunately comes to mind here is Kerblam from Series 11, which features a company that is basically Space Amazon. The villain is Charlie, an activist who hates that Kerblam replaced most of its human workers with machines and treats its remaining workforce unfairly. His plan is to discredit Kerblam by sending packages of exploding bubble wrap to all its billions of customers. Given that Charlie had already infiltrated the company, I'm not sure why he didn't just try to take it down from the inside rather than killing a bunch of their innocent customers. things. But that might have made it even more obvious that the way the Doctor acts is out of character for her. Rather than just trying to stop Charlie's plan while sympathizing with his concerns, the 13th Doctor criticizes him for attacking Kerblam at all. The victory at the end of the episode sees Kerblam thinking about making some token concessions to its workforce, while still not addressing the majority of the workers' rights violations that the episode shows the company committing. The Interstellar Song Contest is slightly better than Kerblam for a few reasons. In the first place, Cora, one of the contestants who is secretly a Hellion too, takes advantage of the disrupted contest to broadcast a song about Helia's plight that the corporation censored back when they were in control of the contest. So the corporation does get a certain amount of comeuppance at the hands of the people they massacred. Second, there's no scene of the Doctor actively defending the corporation, or of the corporation shrugging their shoulders and offering to say a land acknowledgement at their board meetings or something. Third, unlike with Kerblam, where Charlie has a host of other obvious and less stupid ways to take down Kerblam, I can buy that Kid felt like making trillions of people suffer as he has suffered was his only option. But even if the Doctor doesn't outwardly become a shill for the corporation, he at least fails to obviously condemn them when he discovers the truth. As someone whose planet has also been destroyed, it seems like he would have a deep personal reason to understand the pain and destruction that Poppy Honey has caused. It's worth noting that while the Interstellar Song Contest is not a direct one-to-one comparison with real life, it's pretty obvious that some aspects of it are referencing the occupation of Palestine and Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza. The episode's writer, Juno Dawson, said that she was inspired by ongoing events while writing The Plight of the Hellions. In particular, the contest sponsor being framed as a villain feels like a nod to how the real-life Eurovision Song Contest is sponsored by Moroccan Oil, which is an Israeli beauty company that has been criticized for a lack of transparency about its operating locations, given that a lot of Israeli companies operate illegally in the occupied West Bank. Dawson has made pro-Palestine statements before, so assuming that this episode was indeed referencing Palestine, she likely intended it to be an anti-genocide narrative that nonetheless grapples with the complex range of ways that people respond to being oppressed. But the execution of this ambitious idea kind of falls apart in the last 10 minutes because of how the Doctor's character is handled. This is the same Doctor who railed against the Vilengard Weapons Corporation, who understands that some of the most extreme acts of evil are undertaken in the name of profit. Even if he doesn't single-handedly take down Poppy Honey in this episode, shouldn't he at least have expressed disgust at the destruction and death they've caused once he realizes the truth? And even if the Doctor had properly sat with his actions and redirected his anger toward the corporation, his whole vengeful outburst would have felt a bit pointless without it tying into his overall character arc for the season, which it didn't, so it just feels like he decided to be uncharacteristically harsh on a villain for reasons that I found quite flimsy. Given that the story is apparently referencing a real-life ongoing genocide, I really don't think this is the episode where you want your message about the urgency of taking down Poppy Honey to be muddled. I realize that this episode was a Eurovision tie-in and they needed enough plausible deniability to get it approved by the BBC, but Poppy Honey is already shown to be immensely evil in the episode, so would it kill them to have the Doctor get mad about it? This would have been a great opportunity for the Doctor's companion Belinda to properly set him to rights, rather than letting him off the hook so easily. But unfortunately, my issues with Belinda go way beyond this episode, so let's take a look at her character now. The companion for Series 15, Belinda Chandra, might be one of the most agonizingly frustrating things about this era of the show, and it's because she had the potential to be so good. I first saw Varada Sethu as Cinta in the first season of Andor back in 2022, and I thought she'd be a killer Doctor Who companion. So when she was announced as a companion for the 15th Doctor in 2024, I was the smuggest bastard you've ever seen in your life. My dream casting for a companion actually happened. Sethu showed up earlier than expected, appearing as the Anglican Marine Mundy Flynn in last season's episode Boom. I really loved her performance in that episode, and how Mundy stood up to the Doctor. Apparently, Russell T Davies cast Sethu as Belinda after watching footage from Boom and liking her performance so much that he wanted to work with her some more. The fact that Belinda looks like Mundy Flynn is acknowledged in the first episode of the season, with the Doctor assuming that Mundy is a distant descendant of Belinda's. But it's not really addressed further beyond some vague speculation from the Doctor that maybe fate was drawing them together. together. One of my complaints about the previous season was that the Doctor and his companion Ruby got along too well. I like it when the Doctor and companion have a certain amount of friction because I like stories where the companion pushes the Doctor to live up to their ideals. At first, it seemed like Belinda would do just that. When we first meet her in the series opener, The Robot Revolution, she is introduced as a nurse who is confident, experienced, and good at standing up for herself. When Belinda was a teenager, she dated a boy named Alan who was controlling and overbearing. For her birthday one year, Alan gave her one of those Name a Star certificates that said Miss Belinda Chandra on it, despite her showing discomfort at being defined by her marital status. As an adult, it seems like Belinda has learned from that experience. When she finds out that Alan has taken over an alien robot army and is trying to force her to marry him, Belinda stands up to him and his controlling ego. But she also brings that ethos into her relationship with the Doctor, calling him out for being dangerous. She even has the line, "I am not one of your adventures," which is so fabulously fresh and self-aware for the show. We haven't really done the reluctant companion thing in Doctor Who since Tegan Jovanka in the 80s. Just like Belinda won't let Alan reduce her to her marital status, she won't let the Doctor reduce her to just another adventure. She demands to be seen as a whole and complete person. Belinda's second episode saw her learning to trust the Doctor more as they battled the evil god Lux. And while the third episode didn't touch on the reluctant companion thing much, she still had plenty to contribute, with her nursing skills and her heartbreaking scene toward the end where she almost dies to trap the Midnight Entity. But after that, with few exceptions, I got the overwhelming sense that Belinda was just sort of there. Which brings me to the most baffling thing about this season. Why would you get Varada Sethu, give her character such a promising start, and then not do anything interesting with her after episode 3? I didn't need Belinda to be a full-blown mystery box companion or anything like that, especially since Ruby was a bit of a mystery box in the previous season, but I wanted Belinda to feel central to the narrative of the season, and she really didn't aside from the first episode. I was at least expecting her star certificate to play a big role in the finale because the Robot Revolution made a big mystery out of how the robots got her certificate in the future, but the Doctor just chucked it out the TARDIS door in the reality war because he knew it had to happen. There was also a bit of a mystery around why the Doctor was looking for Belinda, but the explanation in the season's 4th episode, Lucky Day, turns out to be relatively mundane. The villain Conrad, who met the Doctor traveling with Belinda when he was a kid, mentioned her to an earlier version of the Doctor, and the Doctor went to find her out of curiosity. Another mystery surrounding Belinda is that in the Robot Revolution, she actually calls the TARDIS by its proper name before the Doctor says it aloud, prompting speculation from fans that she might be secretly a Time Lord or something. But even at the time, I thought it was probably an editing mistake where they deleted a scene of the Doctor explaining what the TARDIS is and just forgotten to delete her line too, and that appears to be exactly the case. Companions don't need a mystery to be good, but Belinda fails at just being a consistently well-written character. The series opener makes a bunch of promises about what kind of companion Belinda will be, only for future episodes to break those promises. At the end of the Robot Revolution, Belinda objects to the Doctor scanning her DNA without her consent, but in the finale, she doesn't react at all when the Doctor performs a DNA scan on her daughter Poppy. We pretty much drop the reluctant companion thing after episode 2, and as I mentioned before, Belinda would be ideally situated to strongly call out the Doctor for his behavior in the Interstellar Song Contest, but her pushback is lukewarm at best and it never comes up again. And yet, all of the trailers for this season prominently featured scenes from the Robot Revolution of Belinda being skeptical of the Doctor. The BBC trailer even highlighted that "I am not one of your adventures" line, and a line from the beginning of Lux where she derisively calls the Doctor Scooby-Doo. This is the very definition of false advertising. It's notable that the first 3 episodes of this season were at least co-written by showrunner Russell T Davies, while episodes 4, 5, and 6 have different writers credited. I've seen some theories online that Davies didn't give the guest writers enough information about Belinda to give her a strong characterization, which explains why she seems so flat in those stories. But okay, sometimes the companion just won't have a huge role for some episodes, and that's fine. Arguably though, they should have plenty to do in the finale, which was written by Davies and therefore has no excuse not to characterize her well. Unfortunately, the season's 2-part finale, Wishworld and the Reality War, are particularly egregious for how little Belinda matters to the story. For the entirety of Wishworld and a good chunk of the Reality War, Belinda is a brainwashed housewife inside a warped alternate reality, so she can't even put her nursing skills to good use. Even when she remembers who she is, she's still pretty inconsequential. There's a scene in the Reality War where the Doctor wants to close up their imaginary daughter Poppy in a zero chamber in the hopes that she'll linger after the wish is broken, and Belinda insists on going inside the box with Poppy. And when that happened, I actually said out loud, they got Varada Sethu just to put her in a box? I've seen some critics criticism of Belinda remaining Poppy's mum at the end of the story, having had her with an ex-boyfriend instead of the Doctor in this reality. The ex-boyfriend isn't Alan, by the way, he's a nice one. I do kind of see where people are coming from with this criticism. There is an uncomfortable history in media of women being forced into having children as their happy ending. And I do have some issues with the way Belinda ended up as Poppy's mum, but not for the reasons you might think. Personally, I don't think women ending up with a child is de facto an issue, it depends on the circumstances. The reason why I don't mind it in Belinda's case is because it's shown that she still has her nursing career. She's not tied down or forced into becoming a housewife, she's still got the career she loves, it's just she's also a mother now. She isn't even living up to Conrad's regressive standard that everyone should be limited to a heterosexual nuclear family life because she's a single mother. Not that there's anything wrong with being a stay-at-home wife and/or mother in a heterosexual nuclear family if that's what you want, but Belinda was shown to love nursing and bristle at the idea of being defined by her marital status. So taking away her career and/or having her end up with a husband would be an issue to me. In addition, it's clear that in this reality, Belinda chose to have a child of her own free will. It's not like in Wish World where she had a child just because Conrad wanted her to. All of that said, I think her ending would be much stronger if Belinda had shown some affinity for children earlier in the series. Perhaps by showing her interacting with children at her nursing job, or having her empathize more strongly with Alice wanting to get home to her daughter in the episode The Well. It was a bit random for Belinda to end up with a kid she didn't have or seem to care about having before Wish World. And even though I didn't mind her ending up with a child, I think making it clear that she wanted kids all along would make it feel way less weird to people who were bothered by her ending. Additionally, if Belinda had gotten the daughter she always wanted in the Wish World only to have her taken away, it would have made me care more about making Poppy real and gotten me more on board with 15's regeneration plot. It's almost like a strongly written companion makes the entire show better. Overall, the show's treatment of Belinda might go down as one of its biggest fumbles in history. I'm not exaggerating when I say that she had the potential to be my favorite Doctor Who companion if she'd just been written to the blueprint that was established for her in the Robot Revolution. She could have grown from a reluctant passenger to a fierce companion who would help the Doctor save the day but also hold him to the mark when he falls short. Instead, she sort of melted into a puddle of nothing. And it's nothing to do with Sethu's performance, she did a great job with the script she was given. I'm sure she's heavily in demand as an actress, but I would love to see her come back for another season with the Doctor. I just want her to have more to do this time. Ironically and frustratingly, the main character that I thought got the best treatment in this season isn't even one of the current leads. That's right, it's time to talk about Ruby Sunday. Ruby Sunday was the 15th Doctor's companion in his first season, and she returns for 3 episodes in this season as well. In Series 14, Ruby functioned largely as a mystery box with a series-long arc about finding her biological mother who left her on the steps of a church as a baby. Having found out that her parents are totally normal people, Ruby gets to shine more as a character in her own right this season. Her role this time around is something we don't see a lot in Doctor Who, an exploration of how traveling with the Doctor changes someone forever after they leave the TARDIS. The most comparable story arcs that come to mind for me are Sarah Jane Smith's appearances in Series 2 and Martha Jones's appearances in Series 4. In Ruby's case, her association with the Doctor makes her a target of Conrad, a podcaster who spreads conspiracy theories about the alien fighting organization UNIT. UNIT keeps tabs on all the Doctor's former companions, so Ruby has stayed in touch with them. In the episode Lucky Day, Conrad pretends to be romantically interested in Ruby to get her to fall for him, but it turns out that he just wanted to get close to her to lure UNIT out for a video that makes them look bad. While Ruby manages to help foil Conrad's plot, she realizes that getting sucked into this dangerous world of gods and aliens has been more traumatizing than she first realized. So she tells UNIT that she's going to go get a change in scenery and break contact with them for now. But she can't escape the Doctor's world for long, because when Conrad teams up with the season's villains to create the dystopian Wish World, she plays an important role in putting things back to normal. In the previous season's episode 73 Yards, Ruby lived out an entire life in an alternate reality, and that gives her a special ability to notice when the timeline is wrong. Ruby is tapped to face down Conrad to stop the Wish World for good, and it's a testament to her compassionate and forgiving character that she doesn't just punch his lights out. Instead, she draws on her own experience as a foundling to empathize with how Conrad grew up without his dad, and she uses the God of Wishes that powers the fake reality to wish for Conrad to be happy. Outside of the wish, he ends up working as a bottle washer. After the wish ends, the Doctor and Belinda's daughter Poppy disappears disappears despite their efforts to preserve her. And it's Ruby who is able to remember her and convince the Doctor to try and save her. Not only is it in Ruby's compassionate nature to want to save Poppy, but she has a personal connection to the situation because she herself was erased from history as a baby in her debut episode The Church on Ruby Road, and the Doctor managed to bring her back. I don't know if Ruby would be quite so insistent about saving Poppy if she knew the Doctor would have to sacrifice himself to do it. Indeed, the most unsatisfying thing about Ruby's return this season is that she never gets to say goodbye to the 15th Doctor. After the Doctor finally starts remembering Poppy with Ruby's help, he leaps into his plan to save Poppy, and we never see Ruby again after that scene. At least Ruby had an emotionally poignant farewell to the Doctor when she left the TARDIS at the end of series 14. But surely she should have gotten a proper chance to say goodbye to 15 for good. It makes very little sense that 15 wouldn't want to pop by and bid her farewell before regenerating. But enough discussion about the good guys, let's turn our attention to the bad guys. The villains in this series were a bit of a mixed bag for me, with some of them being fantastic and some of them failing to live up to their potential. One of the most exciting for me was the return of the Midnight Entity in the episode The Well. I had heard rumours before The Well aired that it was a sequel to Midnight from series 4, and that made me nervous. But if you're gonna do a Midnight sequel, The Well is how you do it. I'm glad they didn't show the Midnight Entity, and I loved seeing it turn everyone paranoid with a whole new set of powers. 400,000 years of living on a radiation-bombarded planet has apparently allowed the entity to evolve since the Doctor last faced it. I didn't notice this when I initially watched the episode, but I've since had it pointed out to me that when Alice and two soldiers are taking a lift out of the mines where the entity lives, the lift shows 4 people inside, not 3. Not to mention that the final scene teases that the entity is now behind the character Mo. So the entity did get out of the mines at the end, and also there were probably at least 2 entities all along. Like the original Midnight, The Well feels like an episode I can come back to again and again. The Pantheon's god of light, Lux, who manifests as a living version of a cartoon character called Mr. Ring-a-Ding, was a fresh and delightful enemy for the Doctor. He's voiced by Alan Cumming doing an American accent, and Cumming did a fantastic job. I frequently get the Mr. Ring-a-Ding song stuck in my head thanks to him. The barber from The Story and the Engine was an intriguingly human character for someone who isn't quite human, and I loved both his ruthlessness and his redemption arc. One of the most fascinating villains in this season was Conrad Clark, the podcaster who I spoke about a little in the section on Ruby Sunday. In the episode Lucky Day, we get to meet Conrad and dive into his twisted motivations. Rather than calling out UNIT for things you could legitimately criticize it for, Conrad promotes a conspiracy theory that UNIT has been making up the aliens it fights in order to mislead the public. Don't get me wrong, UNIT has recently been portrayed as a shady and highly militarized organization, and it makes perfect sense that people would want them to have more accountability to the public. I mean, they seem to have the authority to arrest people, and we also find out in the finale that all UNIT personnel have trackers in their bodies, which is pretty nuts. But Conrad's crusade isn't about holding UNIT accountable, it's about gaining power, fueling his ego, and getting attention, something he was often denied as a child. As Ruby tells him in the climactic scene of Lucky Day, this isn't about a cause, it's grandstanding and ego. You're a lying little boy that can't bear to be called out. Given that UNIT does genuinely protect Earth from alien attacks, Conrad is actively endangering Earth by spreading lies about them with no backup plan for dealing with the very real alien threats. Lucky Day was actually written by Pete McTighe, who also wrote Kerblam, the Space Amazon episode that I mentioned in the section about the Doctor's dark side. Lucky Day is structurally similar to Kerblam, with the villain being a radicalized young man determined to bring down a big organization. But Lucky Day succeeds where Kerblam fails, because while Charlie from Kerblam correctly diagnoses the issue with the company, Conrad is making things up out of spite. Part of what's so fascinating about Conrad is that he both believes and doesn't believe in his own conspiracy. He believes whatever is most convenient for him to believe in any particular moment. I think his ideology is summed up very well by the episode of the alt-right playbook called The Card Says Moops. Indeed, Conrad is a pointed commentary on the kind of nihilistic ambivalence toward the truth that is prevalent in a lot of modern alt-right media. As someone who lives in the US, Lucky Day felt incredibly timely in an era where right-wing conspiracy theories have led to important public services being dismantled in the name of rooting out fraud. It's not a perfect one-to-one comparison because obviously the secretive, heavily armed task force is more morally grey than, say, the Social Security Administration that gives my grandma her pension, but I appreciated the parallels all the same. However, I have some major gripes about how Conrad is presented in the finale, where the Rani has has recruited him to construct the fake Wish World reality because it undoes his characterization from Lucky Day. Part of what makes Conrad so dangerous is that he's not an idealist. He doesn't care about making the world a better place, he just wants attention to feed his ego. But in Wish World, the Rani describes him as someone who wants the world to be a better place, even if we the viewers are meant to understand that his ideas are misguided. And this idea of Conrad as an idealist is not refuted at all, with Ruby even reinforcing it when she confronts him in the reality war. This strikes me as a complete retcon of Conrad's motivations, and it undermines what made Lucky Day such a compelling story for me. Speaking of the Rani, let's talk about her. The Rani was a Time Lord from the classic era of the show who hadn't yet appeared in the modern show, largely because I believe there was a rights dispute over the character. So I'm glad they got the rights issue sorted out, but if they bring her back in the future, I hope she's not quite so disappointing. The Rani's plan is to use Wish World to break reality itself, allowing her to rescue the trapped Time Lord Omega from the Underverse. Then she can use Omega's genetic material to resurrect the Time Lords again after the Master's genetic bomb sterilized her and the Doctor. We actually got two Ranis, one played by Anita Dobson, who has been disguised as Ruby and Belinda's quirky neighbor Mrs. Flood for the last 2 seasons, and the other who splits out of the Mrs. Flood incarnation during a bi-generation at the end of the Interstellar Song Contest, played by Archie Panjabi. Anita Dobson is a delight, but honestly, her incarnation of the Rani baffles me. She doesn't really seem like the cold, calculating scientist that the Rani is supposed to be, and there is no explanation of how come she's been breaking the fourth wall so much. My theory for why she kept breaking the fourth wall was that she was the god of stories from the Pantheon, but that theory is out the window now. It seems like her plan all along has been to spy on Belinda and Ruby for some reason. She escapes during the events of the finale, so maybe she'll come back and redeem herself in my eyes. But right now, my reaction to her is mostly, huh? Archie Panjabi's Rani, on the other hand, is bloody fantastic. During the first part of the finale, Wish World, I worried that she seemed too similar to the Missy incarnation of the Master, who also spent an episode trying to get the Doctor on her side. But in the reality war, she felt much more like a scientist, and her speech where she reveals that she wants to revive Omega so she can do Time Lord eugenics was so chilling and evil. Unfortunately, she gets unceremoniously eaten by Omega, so that's probably the last we can get of her. Omega is a villain from the classic series of the show who first appeared in The Three Doctors from the 1970s. He was a murderous Time Lord who wanted to get revenge on the other Time Lords who he believed abandoned him. In this episode, he has regressed to a mindless mad god, appearing as an admittedly pretty cool emaciated skeleton creature. But he appeared for like 2 minutes, didn't even get all the way out of his hole, and then got defeated by the Doctor shooting him with the Vindicator, which happened to be right there. You could argue that Sutekh in last season's finale Empire of Death was also defeated too easily, but at least he got to destroy the universe before the Doctor stopped him. The only damage that Omega really got to cause was eating the Rani. I guess the last villain in the finale was Desiderium, the Pantheon's god of wishes, but he was only a baby with no agency of his own, so he might as well have been a magic lamp or something. Packing the finale with all those great villains just to defeat them in a major anticlimax was really disappointing. But I think it's at least partly to do with the stuff I'll be discussing in the production issues section. But before we get to that, let's talk about the part of the finale that crushed me the most. That's right, it's time to discuss the Regeneration. So Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor is gone. If you don't count the giggle, the 15th Doctor only got 18 episodes. Unlike every other numbered Doctor except the 8th Doctor, the 15th Doctor never got to face the Daleks on screen. 15 never fought the Cybermen, he never faced the Master, and he never got to wear the orange spacesuit that every main Doctor actor since David Tennant has worn at least once. But 15's short run isn't actually why his regeneration left me so unsatisfied. We only got 13 episodes with Christopher Eccleston's 9th Doctor, but his run feels immensely satisfying because he had a neatly written arc that was tied up at the end of his single season. 9 begins his run feeling jaded, cynical, and guilty about his actions in the Time War, and it leads to him sometimes acting cruelly. But his companion Rose reminds him to be compassionate and helps him become less cynical about life in general. In the finale, 9 has to choose between being a coward or a killer, and he realizes he would rather be a coward than ever kill in cold blood again. In the end, it's Rose who saves him after absorbing wielding the power of the TARDIS. After beginning the season all alone, Nine finally has someone who has seen his dark side and yet still loves him enough to save him when he's in trouble. When he does regenerate, it's not because he dies in battle, but because he dies saving the life of someone he cares about. All of this is to say that it was absolutely possible to give the 15th Doctor a satisfying narrative arc in the space of 18 episodes. Indeed, my first spoilery section of this video was an attempt at sketching out an arc for 15 that felt cohesive and complete. But due to underdeveloped aspects like 15's jarring vengeful actions in the Interstellar Song Contest, the show's failure to pay off the Susan teases, and the fact that 15 sacrificed himself to save an imaginary child that I didn't care about all that much, he regenerated at a point where his arc didn't feel properly resolved. As with many things this season, I believe this is mostly down to the production issues that I'll discuss in the next section. But from a story perspective, it was a huge letdown. So the 15th Doctor is gone. What now? Billie Piper, apparently. Ncuti Gatwa regenerated into the actor who played Rose Tyler. I have no problem with Billie Piper herself, I'm sure she could play the Doctor very well, but I'm not a fan of this decision because it feels like a gimmick, especially because we just had David Tennant, who played the 10th Doctor, return as the 14th Doctor. I was pretty much okay with having Tennant back because that was for the 60th anniversary specials, and anniversary specials are always about fan service. And at the time when Tennant was announced to be returning to the show for the anniversary, Gatwa had already been announced as the next mainline Doctor the week before. It was clear that we were getting a brand new Doctor right after the fan service of the anniversary specials. Right now, there's no new actor lined up, it's just Piper, and there isn't even the excuse of an anniversary to justify her return. I think if we hadn't seen Tennant return to the role so recently, I would have been thrilled to have Piper as the Doctor, but it's just too much too soon. If I had to guess, if I had to hope, I don't think Piper will be around for long. It's probably just to bridge the gap until they can run auditions for a more long-term Doctor again. Indeed, the end credits of the Reality War pointedly don't introduce her as the Doctor, when previously the new Doctor has always been credited that way. I've seen theories that maybe she's not really the Doctor, but rather a vestige of the Bad Wolf entity, which was what Rose became when she absorbed the energy of the TARDIS to save Nine. There is a suspicious shot of the darkened center TARDIS console as the Doctor is regenerating, which could indicate that the TARDIS's energy has leaped into the Doctor and awakened Bad Wolf. I would certainly prefer it if Piper isn't really playing the Doctor and the real 16 will be a new actor. Maybe she'll just hold down the fort for a 2026 Christmas special or something, and then we'll get the proper 16th Doctor at the end. Side note, I really do think that numbers should be saved for proper long-term Doctors and not one-time gimmicks. I really wish they'd called David Tennant's second incarnation of the Doctor the Bridge Doctor or something, in the same vein as the War Doctor and the Fugitive Doctor, rather than giving him the whole 14th number. The one exception is that I would let Gatwa get a second number if only he would come back again. So now it's time to tackle the mystery that's been hanging over this whole video. Why was the regeneration so sudden, and why did the Reality War suck so much? One word, my friends: Disney. Let's back up a bit. In 2022, the BBC entered into a distribution deal with the devil, I mean Disney, which stated that new episodes of Doctor Who would be streamed on Disney Plus everywhere in the world except the UK, where it would still stream on BBC iPlayer like usual. Other streaming services have also distributed the show internationally at various points. For example, HBO Max hosted series 1 through 13 of the revival show in the US for many years, and their deal is just about expiring now. The Disney deal was somewhat unique in that Disney agreed to contribute a certain amount to the show's production budget, though they don't own Doctor Who, and showrunner Russell T Davies retains creative control over the story. But this deal with Disney is probably the culprit for Gatwa's exit and the uncertainty around when the next season will air. We may never know the true extent of what happened behind the scenes. The official line from the show seems to be that Gatwa only doing 2 seasons was always the intention from the beginning. In a behind-the-scenes video posted to the Doctor Who YouTube channel, Gatwa said it was always the plan to do this amount of seasons. And that's true in the sense that I believe his contract was for 2 seasons with the option to renew, but I have a hard time believing that Gatwa wasn't at least seriously thinking about renewing his time on Doctor Who until very recently. Gatwa's seasons were filmed very close together, with principal photography for his second season finishing on May 24th, 2024, while his first season was still airing. In June 2024, Russell T Davies said in an interview with Radio Times that he was working on scripts for Gatwa's third season and that they were hoping to start shooting in early 2025. On The Graham Norton Show in October 2024, Gatwa said, "We did the second series this year, the Christmas special is coming up, and we are filming a third series next year." But this comment was cut from the live broadcast, presumably because Gatwa's third season hadn't been commissioned. Indeed, not only had this hypothetical Series 16 not been commissioned by early 2025, there were reports of heavy reshoots on the Series 15 finale around February. On the day the reality war aired, the fan-run Doctor Who Filming Locations Twitter account, which has a pretty accurate track record of reporting on Doctor Who filming activity, shared, "They will paint the story that it was always the plan, but it wasn't. All the stuff in the house at the end and Ncuti's regen was shot in February 2025. The episode originally filmed in April 2024. Based on the way the finished finale feels, with all the villains defeated within 30 minutes to leave room for a tacked-on Regeneration story, I absolutely believe the reshoots were to add the Regeneration." Disney Plus Germany accidentally leaked a still of the finale that showed the Doctor and Belinda dancing at a party, which doesn't appear anywhere in the episode that aired. So the finale was changed recently enough that they already had a promo shot available for the original ending. All available evidence suggests that Gatwa changed his mind about staying on the show sometime between his Graham Norton appearance in October 2024 and the reshoots in February 2025, and the Doctor Who team had to scramble to make it work with the story. So why did Gatwa make that decision? Again, we may never know the full reason. Gatwa said in his behind-the-scenes video that the role was very physical and demanding, saying, "I would love to have the energy and the youth to be able to do this full-time for the rest of my life, but my knees are telling me it's time." But the rumor has been for a long time that because Disney is dragging their feet about renewing the distribution deal, and it's unclear when the next season of the show will film, Gatwa decided to dip so he wouldn't have to keep his schedule clear for Doctor Who. And if that's the case, I honestly can't blame him because he's gotta book other projects to pay the bills. Based on Davis's June 2024 claim that they might start shooting the next season in early 2025, it's likely that the producers hoped 15's first season would do such amazing numbers that Disney would jump to extend their deal for a third season. Unfortunately, that was always a long shot given how trigger-happy Disney can be about cancelling even their most popular shows. But if the gamble had paid off and Disney had renewed their distribution deal with the BBC for a third season of Doctor Who shortly after Series 14 broadcast last year, it would have given Gatwa more certainty over his schedule. And it's likely that 15 wouldn't have regenerated and Gatwa would be filming his third series as we speak. Just one more reason to hate Disney, I guess. It's true that Christopher Eccleston also decided to leave the show after filming had already started for his era, but he made the decision early enough that the script for the finale could be reworked before principal photography even happened. The result was the masterpiece that is The Parting of the Ways, as I discussed earlier. Unfortunately, Gatwa seems to have been strung along for long enough that by the time he decided to leave for good, there was hardly enough time to get his finale ready. Obviously, the BBC wouldn't want to tell the truth about all this because that would cast even more uncertainty over the future of Doctor Who. Which brings me to what I think might be next for the show. Disney is probably not going to be a long-term partner for Doctor Who. Leaving aside the financial troubles plaguing the streaming industry in general, Disney in particular seems to be moving away from their streaming offerings, with Andor showrunner Tony Gilroy claiming that the company told him behind the scenes that streaming is dead. I'm pretty confident that the BBC will keep making Doctor Who because it's one of their biggest IPs and makes them tons of licensing money. They might try to find a different international distribution partner, or they might make the show on their own smaller budget. Indeed, reports came out recently that the BBC are looking for a production partner to create a cartoon spin-off version of Doctor Who for CBeebies, the BBC channel aimed at preschoolers, which suggests they are looking to use the hell out of the IP. As for the main show, I'm not overly excited about their decision to maybe make Billie Piper the Doctor, but maybe they can make something good out of that misstep. There are also some interesting story hooks left over from recent seasons, including who the mysterious boss is and who picked up the Toymaker's gold tooth that imprisoned the Master at the end of the Giggle. But with no new filming slated, it seems likely that the show will be off the air until 2027. Maybe the end of 2026 if they can cobble a holiday special together. But we just don't have a lot of certainty right now, as evidenced by what Russell T Davies wrote in his latest letter from the showrunner column in Doctor Who magazine. Doctor Who will never end. There are pathways leading to potential futures. But we don't know what's happening yet, and while everyone works that out, I'll take a pause on this page. Thanks for reading. Hopefully we'll have news soon, and certainly upcoming spin-off show The War Between the Land and the Sea is about to break out, so there are great things ahead. Until then, it has been an absolute joy. This last line was referencing the 15th Doctor's final words before regenerating. I've seen some people assume that Davis is leaving the show based on his sign-off here, but I personally just read that as him pausing his column for now because he has nothing to report. The last Whoniverse episodes commissioned under the Disney deal are for an upcoming spin-off show called The War Between the Land and the Sea, which seems to be focused on UNIT and the Sea Devils. The release date hasn't been announced yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pushed that spin-off into 2026 to help bridge the gap. On the plus side, based on the initial trailer for The War Between the Land and the Sea, it actually looks pretty good. After 2 seasons of ambitious wild fantasy plots, I'm looking forward to a Whoniverse story that feels a bit more down to earth. Pete McTighe, who wrote Lucky Day, is also the showrunner for The War Between, and that episode seems to function as a prequel for The War Between by hinting that UNIT's leader Kate Stewart will get in trouble for unleashing an alien monster on Conrad. The prospect that The War Between might explore UNIT's dark side more has me super excited to see what's in store. Well, I've been prattling for quite long enough, so now I want to know what you think about the latest season of Doctor Who. What did you like? What did you hate? What do you think about the fact that Rose Tyler might be the Doctor now? Are you looking forward to The War Between the Land and the Sea? Let me know in the comments. I'm super excited to discuss. Subscribe to my channel for more Doctor Who rambles, and remember to sign up for my monthly newsletter to get early access to all my videos. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.